That's the take your breath away moments if you've done it right. And then, seeing it in action. We do a lot of public facilities, educational facilities, performance venues, and to see a crowd file into a project that you've done and enjoy a performance is thrilling.
Right.
To see a bunch of kids running around a classroom building that we've done is incredibly incredibly rewarding. We work with a lot of churches up and down the peninsula of all kinds of denominations, and congregations are almost all like really outwardly focused on the community and helping homeless and just seeing the work they do. And then maybe we just did a commercial kitchen for them. It's not a very jazzy program, but then you see it in their, doing a homeless feeding program, and it's really good to feel like you're helping, push things in the right direction.
So can we start off? Can you just tell me a little bit about yourself and your background?
Well, I came to architecture a little bit later than a lot of people. I was interested in great buildings and stuff when I was a kid, and I remember reading books about the cathedrals and the pyramids and Stonehenge and kind of like cool built stuff. But I kind of that interest kind of became, I don't know, just submerged for a while, and through high school and college, and I was a humanities major, an English major as an undergraduate, kind of rather aimless, to be honest with you. I didn't really have an idea of what I was going to do. And back then, that was in the late 70s, to date myself. Back then, what happened to, aimless English majors is they ended up in law school. And I was like the fallback, right? And so that's what kind of kept the folks off my case, is like, and my sister had done the same thing. She's 6 years older than me. And so it's like, they figured, all right, he'll be able to make a living. And then I took a architectural history class end of my junior year. And it was a survey from, earliest structures to modernism. And so it was like, if you missed a lecture, you would miss like the Baroque, the Renaissance, and the, Rococo all in one day. So you had to show up, right? And by the third or fourth lecture, I swear to God, a cartoon light bulb went on over my head. And I had this epiphany like, oh, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be an architect. And now, mind you, I had no particular talent, no evidence of visual thinking or the ability to draw or anything, but I was unfazed and never looked back. Now, the reality of sort of recalibrating my brain from left to right or right to left, whichever it is, was painful and long. And it was akin to like learning a foreign language, when you're 20 years old, and it's hard. So it took a few years. I got out of, when I graduated from college, I ended up going back to Foothill College and taking, drawing classes and calculus classes and physics. Then finally, and I got some, basically I got a job at an architectural firm as their errand boy. And I would just, ferry blueprints all over town and run errands for the principals and stuff like that. And then I got hired as an admin at a really small firm, a man named Robert Peterson, who just passed away this summer, sad to say. A great guy, and hired me basically as a part-time secretary, for want of a better word. And I would just show up at 8 and leave at 5. And finally, they gave me a drafting table and some pointers on how to draft. And I ended up working for Bob for 10 years through graduate school, and until we started this firm. And I went to the 3-year master's program at UC Berkeley. I call it the Option 3, and it's designed for people just like me who had a background in other things. So we had people from all walks, many of whom were having the same kind of very steep learning curve that I did. And man, that was a amazing first year in that program, but incredibly intense.
Can only imagine. I mean, you probably know this, but one of the first people I talked to was Mark Cavagnero, and he told a very similar story. I think he didn't have an undergrad in architecture. I think he was at Harvard. And
he has a humanity,
like history or something like that. Yeah. And very similar, like wasn't one of these kids who was like, obviously I've known my entire life that, I sketched everything and I was going to be an architect. It was more just like, okay. Yeah. And
it worked out pretty well for him.
Likewise. Yeah.
I think it's doing okay.
It's interesting though, because as I talk to more and more people in the design world, I mean, and this is a calling, right? This is not a career that you choose because it's like Wall Street and you're just going to go make a bunch of money, right? That's not it. And a lot of people have known for a really long time that this is what they wanted to do, but I've also heard that pivotal moment, that light bulb moment where it's just like, man, and then my path changed, right? And that was...
Well, I remember calling my folks, and my mom, who still walks this earth, who's like, the number one member of my fan club. She was like, "Oh, honey, that's wonderful. You're going to be great." And then I called my dad, who was an engineer and a little bit more of a realist, and my father. I said, "Hey, Dad, I figured it out. I'm going to be an architect." And it was like a long pause. He had a very deep voice. He was like, what makes you think you'd be any good at that? But it was totally fair question, because I hadn't shown any aptitude for it, right? He lived long enough to see me get established, and he was on our board of advisors, and he's very, very proud that I did make a go of it. But, it was a completely valid question because it's not like going to law school where kind of anyone can do it. You either have it or you don't. And for many years, it wasn't clear whether I did or didn't really have it. And I think I have, but
right. I think you do pretty well. That's funny. I think Mark said the same thing as his backup was law school too, because I think he had a brother who was a lawyer. So what would you say is one of the favorite parts of your job? Either now as an agency principal in that role, or before when maybe you were focused more on design, or maybe that's the case now. Whatever.
Well, I still try and focus on design. We love chasing work. It's the thrill of the chase, and increasingly, you don't just interview for work and show your credentials. You end up doing little design charrettes to show at least conceptual ideas of how you would approach a project. So pursuing work inevitably involves design. Obviously, the front end design work is the thrill, and it's that moment where the pile of trace crumbled up on the floor is getting to where you can't get out of your chair, and then finally the partie emerges and sort of the concept kind of clicks into place. That's another one of those kind of little light bulb moments that happen. And, in some projects, it's very obvious what the solution is. And then sometimes it's very elusive and it takes, many iterations and, false starts, or you get an idea and then it proves that it's not the right idea, but it leads you to the path, and it's that to sort of testing the hypothesis. So that's just, the aha moment, and there are oftentimes many of them in a project. The middle part, the construction documents, and not so much. That is such a incredible, push a rock up a hill and then push it up again the next day, and the documents are so enormous now. The set of drawings is 3 inches thick, and but then the construction phase is the sort of the bookend phases as you see the thing emerge out of the ground or out of the shell of whatever structure you're working in. Is just, that's the take your breath away moments if you've done it right. And then, seeing it in action. And we do a lot of public facilities, educational facilities, performance venues, and to see a crowd file into a project that you've done and enjoy a performance is thrilling.
Right.
To see a bunch of kids running around a classroom building that we've done is incredibly incredibly rewarding. We worked with a lot of churches up and down the peninsula of all kinds of denominations, and seeing, I'm not particularly, church going type, but the people, these congregations are almost all like really outwardly focused on the community and helping homeless, and just seeing the work they do. And then maybe we just did a commercial kitchen for them. It's not a very jazzy program, but then you see it in their, doing a homeless feeding program, and it's really good to feel like you're helping, push things in the right direction. Right. We really pride ourselves on working for organizations that further the good in all manner, whether it's educational or artistic or community-based organizations. So that's the thrill of it, is to see its impact. That's really cool. That is really cool. We like to win in design awards too. I mean, that too, right? We just won one. We just heard a couple of days ago, we won one for a student union at a high school in East San Jose. Oh, wow. It's kind of an underserved community. And we've done a bunch of work on this campus. And that, I swear to God, this student union, it looks like it belongs on a Cal State, campus. It's really sophisticated and fun and lively, and it's kind of a food court. And we're just thrilled that this community is going to have a facility that nice. That the old one was just terrible. Right. So, yeah, it's nice when our peers recognize us. So, related to projects, if there was a project that stood out in your mind, and I think you just kind of said it, but something where you maybe overcame a lot of obstacles, or for whatever reason it stands out, and a lot of times those underserved areas tend to stand out, right? Just because of the use that somebody's going to get out of it. To mind, and I actually neither of them really fall into that, serving the underserved, but those are really gratifying for kind of social reasons. The two projects that really stand out in my mind are we started working at Stanford pretty early in our career at CAW, and our projects there initially were pretty modest, and they were I wouldn't call them on their A-list buildings, kind of some dorm remodels on some 60s stuff. But then we got a job in 2000, I think in 99 or 98. We got hired to work on a historic dormitory called Toyon Hall. That was a Bakewell and Brown designed historic, beautiful building that had really been kind of poorly treated by the facility maintenance people and the fire marshals, and they just kind of walled this thing up. And but the bones were unbelievable. And Bakewell and Brown, designed City Hall in San Francisco and the Opera House, but they did. They were the campus architects in the teens and 20s and 30s at Stanford, and did probably 100 buildings, and they're magnificent buildings. And I remember walking into that building with, they actually had to check out the keys to the building. It was like over winter break or something. And it felt like getting the keys to like your dad's Porsche, and like 2 weeks after getting your driver's license. It was like thrilling and terrifying. And I put my shoulder behind that project in a way that, motivated by I can't screw this up. And it turned out really well. So it was like the first time we got to work on the good stuff, right? Really precious building stock. And then kind of bookending that, we just finished a major addition to and renovation to a amphitheater at Stanford called Frost Amphitheatre, which is this quite revered and famous grassy bowl that back in the day, everybody played there. The Grateful Dead played there. I went to concerts there. My friends and family played on that stage as student days, and we got to. But it basically had the modern concert business is so sophisticated and production heavy now that it was impossible to put on any kind of shows of any sort there because there was no support. and there was terrible access for truck access because you had to go over this hill. So anyway, we did a major renovation and added tunnels to and a big stage house and a giant stage canopy and accessibility for disabled people and kind of a major redo of it. But all the while trying to preserve this kind of bucolic, beautiful, designed, but still naturalistic looking setting. And that opened last year, and to see the people streaming in to see the symphony, to see, an EDM show, to see Bob Dylan and Willie Nelson and a Grateful Dead sort of interpretive band. All the Deadheads showed up again. It was just pretty thrilling, and to see especially the different crowds, the sort of the symphony crowd and the Dylan-esque people, and it was just so those two really stand out in my mind. I'm very fascinated with performance spaces, and they're very technical, and yet they have to have a kind of a magic to them for the intimacy between performer and patron audience.
Right.
So
it's funny you say that, because I'm thinking now, like the concert in my mind that stands out was a band that I really liked, but it was at the Greek Theater at Berkeley. And it's just this combination of things, right? It's this iconic, very old venue. It's open, and the weather was amazing that night, and the acoustics are amazing.
Who was it?
It was a band called the Lumineers.
Okay.
Lumineers, and this was bordering on like 7 or 8 years ago when they were kind of still up and coming. And it's just like the stars aligned, right? It just felt, it's a combination of a bunch of things, but that definitely stands out.
We worked on the Greek Theater 3 times.
Did you?
We did the seismic renovation and the back of the house. And then just a couple years ago, we added a concession and restroom building to the north of it.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I know exactly what you're talking about.
I could have easily said the Greek Theater is one of those projects that really stands out, because that was our first. We did a lot of studies for UC Berkeley. We would do a feasibility study on a project, but none of them ever went to construction. But then we got that job, and that was the very first job on Berkeley campus. And it's a campus icon. It's a John Galen Howard. It was John Galen Howard's first building on campus. He was the campus architect during the early years. It's about, 100 yards from the Hayward Fault, completely unreinforced concrete. It's like, what could go wrong? World-class performers performing in front of an unreinforced colonnade. But that was my very first performance space. And it kind of it bit me with I got the bug. Yeah. And
that's so cool.
Magical place.
What about something kind of flipping from your favorite part to like something on the more challenging side? Was there anything you can think of that would be kind of the hardest part of your journey so far, or just like maybe a pretty big challenge you had to overcome throughout your career?
Basically, practicing architecture is there are an unlimited number of ways to screw up. Every project is basically a prototype, and we don't do a lot of the same thing. Maybe different types of practice. If you're doing like multifamily housing or something, you kind of get a bag of tricks down, and you can repeat them and really perfect them. We tend to not do that kind of work, although we certainly learn from our past projects. But it's just you do the best set of drawings you possibly can, and then they're basically critiqued through the construction process. And especially with the big boy contractors that we work with, or alternatively the low bid public works guys who are somewhat predatory. Let's just call it what it is.
Right.
And so you're constantly defending your documents. Your mistakes or your omissions come to light, and they cost money. And working through that process and owning our mistakes when it's one thing to forget something and it's a change order, but if it had been in the drawings, it would have cost the same amount of money minus 10%. So it's a value added type of a thing. the times when we actually make a mistake and work has to be redone or remedial work done, those we've had a long history of just paying for. So we write checks on darn near every project we do. Mm-hmm. And in the long run, that is such a good investment in client relations. And clients are shocked, actually. They're absolutely shocked when we say, you know what, we screwed that up. So that's not going to be a cost that you incur. And we actually, try to foster a culture here of nobody gets, in the doghouse for making a mistake, or because it's just so difficult to do this perfectly. And it's not difficult; it's impossible to do a building perfectly. If you make the same mistake 3 times, that's a different discussion. But generally, people don't. People in our profession, I think, take their responsibilities really seriously, and certainly that's true of the colleagues here. So every project has, its heart-stopping moments of like, got to go to a meeting with the client and sort things out.
Who are some leaders in architecture that either you admire or maybe have inspired you in some way? And they can be peers, they can be, kind of more famous designers who, maybe aren't living anymore, or teachers, or kind of anybody that would fall under that admire or inspire.
Well, I have a couple of personal mentors. I mentioned Robert Peterson, my first kind of real boss. He was a great influence on me and really gave me my first chance. When I was in graduate school, I fell under the kind of mentorship of Donlin Linden. He rose to fame very early in his career as part of MLTW and Sea Ranch, and they did the famous condominium. And Donlin has had a long teaching career. He's now emeritus at Berkeley, of ferocious intellect. I am only now learning some of the lessons that Donlin taught me in Architecture 200 in fall of 1983. And it's funny, I ran into him in the airport a year or two ago, and I told him that, I just figured out what you meant by that. He's this kind of Hemingway-esque figure. He's like, big, deep laugh. So, that kind of a lifelong mentor is the gift that keeps on giving. Well, there's one other personal contact, which was a man named Joseph Ehrlich, and he had a firm called Ehrlich Rominger in Palo Alto, and that was the firm that I was basically their delivery boy in 1981. And I used to take Joe to the airport. I used to pick up Joe's dry cleaning and take his car to the car wash and stuff like that. I was literally making $6 an hour, being a gopher. And I just thought it was the best job in the world because I was working for an architect. And fast forward, after Joe retired from practice, he was on the board of a little nonprofit museum here in Palo Alto that they ended up hiring a very young Cody Anderson Wasney architects in like our year 2 of our practice. And we got that job. And so Joe became our client. And he really took us under his wing and mentored us, and he became a friend. We put him on our board of advisors with Monty Anderson and I and our fathers, and Joe Ehrlich was our advisory board. And Joe became just an enormous influence on both Monty and I and the firm. And that whole ethos of fix your mistakes is something Joe drilled into us. And, he would recount his great failures and how, they became these opportunities to, make amends. So a towering figure in my life. Very, very fortunate to have those 3 mentors in my life. In the contemporary, there's people whose design I admire. I tend to gravitate towards the kind of the rationalists. Like I love Jim Cutler's work up in Seattle. I love Lake Flato's work, and we've had the opportunity to work with them. And Ted Flato is just an amazing guy. we've gotten to work with some really great architects in partnerships. We work with Ennead Architects out of New York, and they are just first class people and just remarkably talented. So they're very inspirational. We do a lot of work with Bill Ron's office in Boston. So I've gotten to rub shoulders with some really great architects, and hopefully a little bit of it's rubbing off. I mean, we do really learn stuff by working with these guys.
All right, last question for you. Kind of related to our audience and our students, what is the best advice that you could give to an up and coming design professional? And whether that's, maybe programs to follow, hopefully they're coming through, our foundation and getting that, the mentorship, the network, and some of the technical skills early on. But maybe from a standpoint as an agency owner, when you're looking to hire somebody or something kind of in your own journey that you wish you had known earlier.
Learn how to draw. Learn how to draw by hand.
Yep.
Sketch. That's sounds geezerish in today's digital world, but all these kids are going to be digital natives, and they're going to pick up these programs just with much more facility than my generation or even the next generation. But nevertheless, have that ability to sort of communicate through your hand. Develop a hand, as they say. The other advice, and this is maybe I carry a bias to this because I have a humanities background. Take a lot of architectural history, take a lot of art history, and take a lot of non-architecture classes. The ability to read and critically and to write and speak clearly and coherently is an enormous advantage that I have from my earlier education, my undergraduate education. And I can't tell you how much time I spend writing in my job, writing a proposal, writing a description, writing some sort of document to convey design intent, to convey approach, or how we would approach a problem. It's an incredibly important skill that's very lacking in our profession. And so I think just the critical thinking that comes from a liberal arts education, to the extent that you can fit those courses in at all levels, especially when they go to undergraduate, I would urge that sort of roundedness, because they're going to learn the programs and they're going to get the studio time. I wouldn't worry too much about the kind of professional practice side of things. You learn that on the job. Mm-hmm. And even the most technically savvy students we get out of Cal Poly generally don't really know much about how things are built. Mm-hmm. And then, if a student could have a summer job or two working on a construction site, that'd be a hell of a background.
That's a good one. That's a really good one.
Or conversely, buy a fixer-upper like I did in San Francisco and spend 15 years rebuilding, doing every trade because you
doing everything. Oh man, I love it. I love it.
That definitely made me a better architect.
Chris, thank you so much for doing this. Genuinely really appreciate it. There's so much good stuff here.
I got my dream job. And, so many people I know in this profession would say the same thing. It's the best job in the world. And if you can make a living doing it, it's just, a gift. Every day is a gift to work. So,
yeah.
You got to work for a living. If it's something you love, it's just the best thing in life.